Hello, nerds for humanity. I am back in the nerd zone, and we have a returning guest, Philip, who is a Biden supporter, and he was on the show before Super Tuesday when I was still hoping that the Democratic Party would make a different choice, but I think I've resigned myself to accept that that the nominee is likely to be Joe Biden, barring some unexpected event. But welcome back to the show, Philip. How are you doing?
I'm great. Great to be back. And you got an awesome show, so great to be a part of it.
Yeah. Well, I think you were pretty optimistic about Biden, his State of the Union, and I think your prediction came true that he did way better than a lot of people expected, myself included. Um, I still feel like he's not been the most accessible guy. I remember the days when like John McCain would just take questions off the cuff from anybody who would ask, and you'd see Obama on the various kind of interview shows, and before Super Bowl and all that kind of thing. But you could argue like Biden's busy. I guess. What's your read? Are you happy with the Biden campaign's performance so far? Like, what's your take?
Yeah, I'm pretty happy overall. I think that Biden's strength has never been, um, giving like the perfect speech every time. I
Mhm.
think his strength has always been in actually getting really good results and making, real change, real legislation. And so I'm excited about the opportunity that this campaign is going to bring for people to really talk about what Biden's done to really change people's lives, whether it's kind of the infrastructure bill, whether it's, gun reform, whether it's capping the price of insulin at $35. I feel like there's a lot of really good things to talk about. And I think Biden's gotten out in the campaign more and more. I believe after the State of the Union, I think he got to 5 states in 7 days to give speeches.
Mhm.
And that kind of shows this campaign is heating up. He's getting out there more. But, of course, he's still the president. He has a lot to deal with. Still trying to get the border bill done. Still trying to do a lot to resolve the situation in Israel and Gaza. So there's a lot to do still that takes up a lot of his time. But I'm excited to see him more out in the campaign trail and talking about what he's gotten done.
Now, there was a New York Times Siena poll that came out. I think it was like maybe late last week or early this week, and it kind of continued to show Trump leading in most of the swing states. And I was at a neighborhood event with a bunch of Biden supporters, and I was like, "Are you sure? Like, you guys seem really confident." And they're like, "Oh, don't worry, people aren't paying attention. Once the real choice is presented to them, it'll be obvious." Do you feel the same way? Like, what's your take on these polls? Like, should we just throw them out? Like, New York Times can't be trusted?
I think polls are, they're a snapshot in time. And
Hmm.
I think you have to treat them as, okay, this is how a large number of people are feeling at this given moment. And I think they should be, making people think, okay, we have a lot of work to do before election day. I don't think people should look at them and say, okay, well, Biden's down in this poll. That means it's all over. We've lost the election. Why even bother voting? But I think people should recognize, there are a lot of people who are supporting Trump. And there are also a lot of people we have to reach out to say, listen, you voted for Biden in 2020, but you're not so sure anymore. But here's why you should come back and vote for Biden again, and why, no matter what state you're in, it's really important that we get your vote. And so I think people should look at those polls and say, listen, there's work to do, but, you know, it's not an insurmountable race to win. We're down, I think the averages show in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, down between about, a point to 2 points. That's
Hmm.
something you can make up. I think the average polling error in swing state polls for elections is about 4 to 5 points. So we're basically within the margin of error there, just to begin with. And people will tune in more and understand that, one of Biden or Trump is going to win, and Trump would be just disastrous. So I'm not too concerned, but I think there is a lot of work to do.
Why? Why do you think it is not just close, but a Biden disadvantage in so many of these crucial states? Because I could as much as I'm very uncomfortable with Biden, I find Trump truly deplorable, beyond deplorable. Um, just anti-American, anti-patriotic, and I just find that he twists and manipulates people, and he's just a terrible person. Uh, and yet, if you ask people, apparently in Georgia and Nevada, they're like, "Oh no, I favor Trump," and I just don't understand why why Trump is still doing so well despite all that we know about him. And the only explanation I have is they don't like the alternative. But what is your explanation?
I think that Trump has destroyed so many norms over his time that people kind of have started to tune out a bit and basically say, okay, well, he did all this terrible stuff, but you know, it didn't seem to affect him that much. Somehow he's still, so it kind of normalizes a lot of that behavior, which is, I think, a really dangerous thing, right? When
Mm-hmm.
we normalize, attempted coups, that's a really bad thing for democracy, And I think that it also is fair to say that I think people have some concerns around Biden that, put energy in to explaining, why they can get past that and still vote for Biden. But I do think that looking at polls that we looked at, I think, together in the last time I was on,
Mm-hmm.
even like Kamala Harris and I think Gavin Newsom polling against Trump, we're not doing great against Trump either. So I think there is somewhat of like a nostalgia to go back to, the Trump era, which always seems weird to me because like I feel like people kind of cut off the last year of Trump's presidency when you think about the economy or thinking about crime or things like that. Because like crime went up in 2020 under Trump, and then unemployment went up, and obviously there was COVID that was impacting it too, but he was mismanaging COVID. So I feel like people have kind of forgotten about all those things of why they really didn't like Trump, and so that's leading people to kind of look at these two people and kind of not have a clearer picture of which one is better. And I think that'll clarify itself over the course of the campaign as we make that clearer and clearer for people just how disastrous Trump would be back in office.
Philip, I really do admire how thoughtful you are about Biden's results. I can't disagree with you on a lot of his legislative accomplishments, and certainly how chaotic and unconstitutional his predecessor was. I will say that there was an interesting New York Times question in that New York Times Siena poll, and it seemed to suggest that people are looking for change, and they don't want like, oh, yeah, let's build back better more. They want major change. 55% think the system needs major change. Actually, 14% are looking for even, I guess they would term it tearing it down entirely. So that's almost 69% that want major change or more. And then in the follow up, many of them believe that if you want major change, it's not going to be from Biden. It will be from Trump. What's your read on that? Do you think why do you think people want such a major change? Because your argument was, hey, it was complete dumpster fire under Trump. Biden's made improvements. Clearly, you should want the latter over the former. I think what this poll is saying is, you know what, they're not just judging Biden versus Trump. They're just saying, I want like massive, reorganization of the whole system, and I don't think I'm going to get that with Biden.
Yeah. I mean, I think the most powerful, words in any campaign ever are "we need a change." Because, the people there's a very, 2% of people who say like, yeah, no changes at all. Everything's perfect right now. And I think it is true that people are hungry for some kind of change. And it would be a major change if Trump came to power, shredded our democracy, and basically, you know, to mass deportation camps, defunded blue states. Like that would be a huge change. But I think when people say major change, a lot of them are meaning very different things of what they want
Mhm.
changed. And it isn't always clear from these polls, right? Because, what major change means to someone who's on the far right or someone on the far left is
Yeah.
really different, right? And I would say that I think Biden's strength is that he does do some really major changes, but I think his vibe and energy is in a very low key way. Part of the reason why I think he's been able to get a lot done and get Republicans on board for stuff that, like, I didn't think Republicans would vote for a gay marriage bill or for gun reform or for an infrastructure bill, but like the reason why he's able to do that is in part because after these things pass, Biden doesn't go around saying like rah rah, I beat the Republicans. I got this huge thing done for
Mm.
you, because
Mhm.
then the Republicans would be like, wait, I don't want to vote for that. I don't want to give Biden a win. And like that's what happened with the border bill, right? Because Biden was trying to do some like big common sense things that would have been a big change to the border and immigration system, make it a lot better. And Republicans realized, wait a second, this would be a big change, and it would be a big change Biden could run on and fix the problem. And so we got to stop that. So I think Biden's focus is a lot on getting things done, but it isn't always marketed in a way that casts them as major change. And I think part of that's because he thinks that's a way to get more done and down the future because it doesn't put Republicans in the feeling of giving Biden a win sometimes. I think that plays into it as well.
Yeah, that example of the border bill, I was really encouraged, to be honest, by Biden's willingness to go with a kind of bipartisan reform package that did include things that got him into a little bit of trouble with his left wing. So I was like, as a center left guy, I'm like, oh, cool. Like I do think the border should be secured and asylum loopholes should be closed. Now when the Republicans voted that down, yeah, that was very cynical and sad to see, given how we've been hearing from the Republicans forever how important the border is, and then you have an opportunity to have massive reform and basically get everything you asked for, and you decide not to support it. The one thing that I had wished Biden had done after that bill got voted down was to say, you know what, I still believe this is a problem. So I'm going to take some executive actions to secure the border, reform asylum applications as much as I can without a new bill to demonstrate like I'm I'm really going to try and make this situation a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't really do that. I felt like he took the political win by supporting the bill, and maybe some on his party were relieved it got voted down. But then, like, I don't feel like he's done much on the border since then, or it doesn't seem like he talks about it.
Well, I think actually this week, I believe the Senate brought back up the border bill to try
Uh
and give it
huh.
another shot and try to put more pressure to get this done. Maybe we're post the Ukraine stuff. Maybe we can, get that bill done once again. So there is like a renewed push, I think, by the Biden administration to see if we can get this border bill over the line.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're right that like we didn't see a bunch of like kind of executive actions. I think the reason why is that those executive actions would have been basically pretty performative because they all would have gotten held up in court, and basically you'd have months of litigation because there would be a district court that would hold them up, and so they wouldn't actually be implemented in a way that actually would get it done because it has to be a legislative solution. But I think it could have been a good marketing technique for sure. And I do think, though, there are some things Biden has taken executive authority to do that are pretty impactful. And one of them was I think it's called the Los Angeles Migration Treaty or Migration Agreement. And he did that with, I believe, it was Belize, Colombia, Spain, Canada, and Mexico, and some other Latin and South American countries to kind of bring them together and say, let's figure out how we can take on some of the root problems of these kind of surge in migrations, how we can get all these countries together to see what they can contribute. So, for example, Belize and Colombia, they had additional TPS they were going to take in, temporary protected status that they were going to take in. Mexico is going to do enhanced kind of work visas for people coming to Mexico to work there. And then at the same time, you had more funding to try and make these countries more stable, their economies better, so people wouldn't feel like they needed to kind of brave this huge journey to get to the US border to begin with. So I think there are actions that Biden has taken apart from Congress to try and really get to some of the root causes of this kind of lack of like kind of an orderly border situation. So I think he has worked on that too. But I think the truth is that in a broken immigration system, we need Congress to step up. And I think it takes leaders from both parties who are willing to say, okay, my far left base, my far right base, like they're not going to like this, but like it's a common sense solution. Like, let's get it done. And you never know, maybe this renewed push to get this done will get Republicans on board to say, let's vote for this. Let's do something genuinely good for the country that would help the border situation. And I will just note one last thing. I think in the last 4 months, illegal border crossings have gone down 40%. And that is in large part because of Biden's partnership with Mexico to try and, through in a similar vein as the migration treaty, to try and get Mexico to take greater responsibility and decrease the surge at the border. So there are actions Biden is definitely taking. He definitely takes the crisis seriously. But I think we need to put pressure on Congress too to have some solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's around a few 100,000 border encounters per month. And a lot of those immigrants, undocumented immigrants, asylum application seekers, like I think over 90% of those applications get denied. So people are applying who, according to the courts, are not really eligible. And then they're benefiting from our inability to process. And it just seems like unfair to the communities where now they have to provide public education, emergency room healthcare, housing. And meanwhile, like, you've got veterans and seniors that are also being unsupported by communities. Like, it just seems unfair. But I'm glad, like I said, I'm glad that Biden was willing to agree to a bill. And I just wish, I feel like prior to that, he never really talked about it. And even some Biden administration representatives were uncomfortable saying that it was a crisis situation. I don't know any way you look at those numbers and not say like, oh wow, this is not sustainable.
Yeah. I think it's a truth in politics that rarely do people want to say, like, acknowledge when things are going badly. Like, no matter what position you're in politics, people are always going to try and, I think, say things are better because, the person who comes out and says things are bad is probably going to get, they'll get no credit for that. And then the other side will say, see, even you admit it's bad. So let's vote you out of office, kind of. So I think it's true that like there that this is something where we need really like kind of good action on. And I think that Biden was though doing stuff even if it wasn't as public, like the Los Angeles like treaty agreement. I think that wasn't talked about at all. But it was a really important like foreign policy maneuver to try and get other countries to take on more of the weight of these asylum cases. These and just so I feel like part of it too is that this is such an issue where it feels like it's being weaponized in a lot of different directions. It's sometimes difficult to kind of have more of an honest discussion about like all the reforms that are happening and need to happen.
Yeah, I mean, this is some Pew Research numbers. It ends at the end of 23, so it doesn't reflect, I think, some of the improvements you're referring to.
Yeah.
But like he was in office since 20, and these are pretty big numbers. I mean, you'd have to go all the way back to like Obama times to even come close to this. But yeah, like I think I would grade Biden better than the Republicans simply because he was willing to try and do some big changes. And probably agree with Steve that Biden's probably not going to get a lot of help from the MAGA folks.
Yeah. I feel like in politics, we should reward people who are like trying to come to solutions, and we should punish people who are trying to make problems worse, but for their own political benefit.
On that front, like, I probably have to say Biden's willingness to agree to the bipartisan reform, like he deserves credit for it. Maybe I'd give him a B given all his other execution on that issue. But, the big thing for me, I'm curious to get your thoughts, is there is this narrative that the only people that are uncomfortable with the Netanyahu Gaza policy are just a bunch of, Ivy League college kids in camps, kind of having lattes and, massage kind of, tents and things like that. And the reality is, I think a lot of Americans, I'll just speak for myself, are very uncomfortable with, 30,000 people dead and 70,000 wounded and nearly 100,000 houses completely razed or damaged, and apparently like a famine that is imminent, if not already happening. And I'm very uncomfortable that this is partly funded by American taxpayers, myself included. I mean, I just wrote a giant check to the IRS. And I don't like the idea of any more 2,000-pound bombs being dropped in neighborhoods. Like, that is not precision bombing. Like, we didn't even do that many in Mosul. So I don't know why the IDF is going all kind of 7 months of nonstop bombing. I acknowledge 10/7 tragedy, 1,200 people died. You have to acknowledge that 30,000 other people died after that, who many of whom had nothing to do with the 10/7 attacks. Even if they were cheering, that doesn't mean you can kill them. So I find Biden's ironclad, unconditional, like whatever Netanyahu wants. Yeah, he did finally, like 2 weeks ago, paused, but then we just released another billion in aid. So I don't know if that pause was kind of window treatment. So for me, that's kind of like a moral issue, and I would not be surprised if this affects Biden turnout in November. No one who cares about Gaza is going to go and vote for Trump, but they might stay home or they might lodge a protest vote with Stein. Um, I mean, I'm in a blue state. I am seriously considering a Stein vote. Not because think she has any chance of winning, but I'm just really unhappy and I want to express my disappointment with the current policy. And frankly, it's not just Biden, like the whole Congress does not reflect American kind of general opinion on this issue. Um, so at any rate, so what's your take on Gaza in general? Like personally, what do you think? I mean, I understand there's different views on this. But then also politically, do you think this is going to hurt Biden, or do you think the young voters and the kind of people who care about this issue will pick Biden because he's probably better, well, for sure, better than Trump on Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, at least politically, who knows? Because like we hopefully this is something where we can get to some kind of like ceasefire and end to the conflict by election day. But even if not, who knows how people are going to react to this? When it's time to vote. But I think you raise a really valid concern about the number of people, Palestinian civilians, who have died in this conflict, and the necessity of getting lots and lots of humanitarian aid into Gaza as soon as possible. And I think that is a very valid concern. I think criticism of the Netanyahu government, as a Jewish American, I embrace the wonderful Jewish tradition of criticizing Netanyahu whenever possible. And so I think that's all very valid concerns and valid things to raise. How I look at Biden's actions, and maybe I see them a little differently than you, I think there are kind of three broad goals I think that Biden is trying to get done. And I think he's been overall doing a good job on this. First is the goal of removing Hamas from power. Second is the goal of protecting civilians, Israelis and Palestinians. And third is getting hostages home that Hamas is still holding to this day. And I think on those three goals, Biden seems to be the only candidate who's kind of focused on all three. So I think Cornel West and Jill Stein, they say we want a ceasefire, but part of getting to a ceasefire is getting Hamas to agree to one. And so far, they've turned down a 6-week ceasefire and a 2-month ceasefire, and that Israel agreed to. And so you need to put pressure on Hamas to come to the table and agree to a ceasefire and release the hostages. At the same time, you also have to put pressure on Israel, which Biden, I disagree a little bit, the idea that Biden hasn't put pressure on Israel. Some of it just is private, and so not everything is public, and so he's doing some private pressure. And that's why he got Israel to expand what they were willing to offer in a ceasefire agreement. to with maybe fewer hostages, longer time period for the ceasefire. And Israel did that, and then Hamas still declined the ceasefire offer. So I think that Biden already got, one ceasefire agreement back in November, and it was really important to get hostages home and get a lot of humanitarian aid in. And we haven't been able to get a ceasefire agreement since then. But he has continued to work on it publicly. He publicly called for a ceasefire agreement. I think it was back in February, with I think the King of Jordan, I believe, and said like we need a ceasefire, a 6-week ceasefire, and then we can use that 6-week ceasefire to build something more enduring. And I think that reflects his desire to protect Palestinian civilians, but also that enduring peace to get to a two-state solution reflects his desire to remove Hamas from power because Hamas is a huge barrier to any kind of long-term peace. And they've openly said, we want to do October 7th again and again and again. And there's no kind of way to kind of make a long-term peace with that because any sort of ceasefire that keeps them in power is just a ceasefire until it's broken, So I guess I would say that, Biden has had a goal to remove Hamas from power. I think that is a worthy goal. But then we have to think about, okay, how do we get that done? And part of that, too, is Biden's focus on getting more humanitarian aid in to protect Palestinian civilians. Because I agree with you 100%. Like, getting rid of Hamas, is a good goal, but you can't just like deny aid to the Palestinian people. And that's why Biden put a lot of pressure on Israel throughout many months to get lots of crossings opened up. He, in the bill that gave money to Israel, it also gave, I think it was $9 billion to Palestinian and Ukrainian refugees. And then at the same time, after the tragedy of the aid workers, Biden got Israel to commit to a lot of more steps to get more aid in. And that's why April is actually the month with the most aid coming into Gaza since the start of the conflict. So I agree with you 100%. We have to do so much more to get more aid into Gaza. And Israel needs to do a lot more to protect civilians. And we need to continue to do what Biden is doing, which is working towards a ceasefire. But I guess I would disagree with you with the idea that Biden is just doing ironclad support and is not putting pressure on Israel. I think it's just very strategic pressure at critical moments to make change. And yes, that's how I kind of see it.
Yeah, I've heard this argument that, hey, behind the scenes, Biden's really tough on Netanyahu. I don't think Netanyahu's responding to that pressure. In fact, a couple weeks ago, there was a talk of like, like there was a brief moment where Hamas was said to have accepted some terms of a ceasefire in Egypt. And then Netanyahu, the next day, released a statement, something along the lines of ceasefire or no ceasefire, we are going into Rafah. And I have to imagine he knew what impact that statement would have on ceasefire negotiations. Meanwhile, like whether Biden's putting pressure or not, we are still providing billions of dollars of offensive aid. And I get it. I acknowledge Steve, Steve's point here, the pier. Yeah, I get it that there was the pier. But it's sort of like, it's like giving a fire extinguisher when you're on the other side, like providing gas to the right wing, Israeli coalition.
Yeah.
That as you mentioned, like a lot of people, I think in America, mistake Netanyahu as some like he is being you can't be pro-Jewish and not be supporting Netanyahu. I have many Israeli friends who loathe Netanyahu and find him even less tolerable than Trump. So like clearly, I think a lot of people who want Israel to be safe and prosperous can also be against Netanyahu, and that is not anti-Semitic.
I agree 100%. I think you can criticize Netanyahu, and I think people should criticize Netanyahu, and that is not anti-Semitic 100%. I guess one point you made though about the $1 billion deal, I think to Israel, it's important to keep in mind that doesn't actually conflict with Biden also withholding the 2,000-pound bombs, because the $1 billion is not going to go to Israel, I think, for a couple years. So that's like a long-term defending Israel from Hezbollah, from Iran, from it's not actually going to be used in this actual like horrible conflict.
Hmm.
And I do think that the withholding of the 2,000-pound bombs and Biden saying very clearly, if you do a major operation in Rafah, I will cut off offensive weapons. That's like my red line. I think that is really impactful and important. Um, and will Israel listen to that? It's unclear, and maybe they won't. But I think um, if you're trying to look for a candidate who's actually, I think advocating for a ceasefire, willing to withhold aid at critical moments, in order to kind of put pressure on both sides, I think Biden's that candidate. What I worry about the message of just ceasefire, right?
Hmm.
That's the only thing, and we should just do, basically, I think Jill Stein's talked about this, maybe, that just pick up the phone, end the war tomorrow, call a ceasefire. I think that misses the reality that, if we have a ceasefire and Hamas comes back to power and is fully in control of Gaza, it's true we might have a ceasefire momentarily, but there's no chance really of any sort of two-state solution that Biden is pushing for. The Hamas will continue to try and do the attacks against Israeli civilians. They'll still oppress their people in Gaza. There's no elections in Gaza. There's no free speech. There's no ability to protest. And they steal a lot of the aid that supposed to go to Palestinians. Hamas takes it. And so I just think that if we're looking for more of a longer term peace, we need to be pushing for a ceasefire, but understand that Hamas doesn't want long-term peace, and that any kind of ceasefire deal needs to also involve an ability to push out Hamas and put someone like the Palestinian Authority or Egypt and Saudi Arabia working together to create some kind of government that can actually serve the Palestinians and push us towards a two-state solution, which will also coincide nicely with Netanyahu being voted out of office in the next election.
Well, we agree on a lot of things in that last piece, Philip. I am absolutely not in favor of Hamas staying in power, and I would actually condition um, a lot of aid that would go to Gaza on it having a elected government that is not Hamas dominated. I would also be very supportive of a fierce Israeli reaction if there were further incursions into Israeli territory or further material Israeli civilian casualties. Like, I'm not saying Israel has to just turn the other cheek, but I'm just saying, 7 months of a response is more than sufficient. Um, so let's move on to one last topic that's a little bit less, perhaps less kind of, emotional for a lot of people, but more interesting, just as interesting from a policy point of view. What is your take on Biden's student aid relief or bailout, whatever you want to call it? I'll be upfront. I'm not a fan of it. I feel like the money should go to people who need it. And yes, I get that a lot of people have student loans. Um, they knew that they were getting those loans before they went, and so it's not like this was sprung on them. I also think that there are people who chose not to go to a 4-year university who then they're not getting any help. And then there are people who paid their loans back and they're not getting any help. So this seems like very strange, and I'll be cynical for a minute. I feel like it's a bit of a election year kind of campaign thing to win over some people who are uncomfortable with him. I just think it's bad policy and not meritocratic, but I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of valid criticisms, some of which you just raised, of student debt relief. What I would say, though, is I think what separated Biden from maybe someone like, I don't know, maybe Jill Stein or Bernie Sanders, was that Biden is a lot more focused, I think, on targeting the student debt relief to the people who need it the most. Just as like one example, the student aid that went, about 900,000 of the 4 million people who got debt relief, 900,000 went through the public service loan forgiveness program. So that's people who went into public service, teachers, firefighters, who often taking a pay cut in order to help us, run our country, And I feel like, and that's where some of the aid went. And I think that's very legitimate to kind of focus on those people who took a pay cut to serve us. And then about, I think, 22.5 billion is from kind of a fraud program that is based on kind of preventing colleges from who basically went out of business or fraudulent, and people still have to pay the bill at the end of that, right? And so trying to help those people too. So I think there are a lot of examples of the student debt relief kind of being, broadcast as like, oh, it's just like someone who went to Harvard is making, $400,000 a year, and they have, they're getting the student debt relief. When in reality, it's a very targeted program aimed at people who genuinely need it and are struggling. And they're also, most of it is also existing programs too. So these are often programs that, one of them is the Public Loan Service Forgiveness Program, which George Bush, I believe, set up in 2006. And that was like a promise, like you go into public service, you pay for 10 years, and we'll forgive your loans. But the problem was Trump, like a lot of what he did when he was in office, mismanaged completely that program. So you had tons of people qualifying under the existing rules that they set up when they took their job, they finished college and everything, and it was mismanaged. So I think only 7,000 people got that loan forgiveness. Then Biden did what Biden does kind of across the board and made good common sense changes to reform the process, make it work how it's supposed to. And now 900,000 people got that forgiveness. So I would just say that I think a lot of these programs are very hyper targeted. A lot of them are already existing programs that just were not fulfilling the obligations that were owed to the people in them. And I think that is a very legitimate way to do student debt relief. And I think you're right, though, that it should not be that student debt relief is like our major policy thrust. This is how we're helping, all Americans, right? It's one way to help some Americans. And then things like the expanded child tax credit that Biden passed is a way to help struggling families. Expanding funding to HBCUs is a good way to kind of take at more the core problems of, student debt that is weighing down some Americans as well. And then the infrastructure bill is a great way to kind of expand a lot of job opportunities for people who are not going to college. Same with the climate bill that created a lot of new union jobs as well. So I just think that like this is an issue where I understand why people feel very mixed about, but I think looking at it as a whole, Biden is doing it's very targeted to people who need it the most, and he's doing a lot of other things that are specifically targeted to working class people who need help as well. So that's what I'd say about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that there was some targeting there. I think, just from like a economics point of view, if you forgive the debt, you're not really addressing the underlying problem of these four-year universities costing like $80,000 a year.
Yeah.
If anything, it just encourages the suppliers to continue raising their rates because government will bail the lenders out or the loan holders out. And then on the public service worker stuff, like I am all for that, but then I just rather give higher salaries to the people doing those jobs. Because what if I'm a public school teacher and I found a way to pay back my loans, or I went to a school that didn't have all the fancy accoutrements and so that I could afford it, and then this other teacher, who went to some fancy school, like gets their loans forgiven? Like that doesn't seem fair at all. But I agree that the motive is right. It just doesn't. It seems like a one-time fix. It doesn't seem like a root cause.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point. I think it's important to say like, okay, maybe this is like a fix for people who've been kind of hurt by the system, but then how do we fix the system overall so this doesn't keep happening again and again? I think that's a really valid point. I think Biden's done some work through his executive power to increase price transparency of universities, and then also in Build Back Better, there was a pitch trying to make community college totally free to try and make that as a more viable option for people trying to avoid student debt. Unfortunately, Joe Manchin killed that part of Build Back Better. But I do think that you're right that in the next 4 years, I am confident that Biden will focus on trying to take on those kind of root causes, which I think are really important. And we should be talking a lot about too, because we don't want this debt cycle to keep going again and again and again. So I agree with you 100% there.
All right. Well, we've got two more topics and then I'll let you go, Philip. It's always a pleasure having you on the show. And
awesome being here.
Yeah. Also, you were on that panel where we had a bunch of other supporters.
Yeah. That was an interesting panel.
I felt bad for you, even though I don't agree with your guy. I was like, man, they are really going after him.
Hey, we
But
can do it again sometime. It's all good.
I appreciate that you maintained a level-headed, sort of rational, calm response, and I think the Biden camp, Biden supporters are lucky to have people like you advocating for them. Okay, I would like to get your thoughts on what you think people should do in November, and why. And I'm going to start with my view. I think you'll probably disagree with it, but that'll be fun. So my view is that if that the whole system does seem very, I'm not going to use I'm going to be careful about my language here. um it gives the established parties and incumbents like way massive advantages. And to me, like, democracy should be like free market competition. It should be like everybody should be able to compete, have a chance. The more competition there is, the better. Just the same way, like, Lena Khan would say the industry should have more competition. So I think the same should be applied to politics. And it shouldn't be like the same two parties with, their kind of blessed candidates making it through. Um, and I'm also really disappointed in Congress. I'll give you an example. I live in the 16th district of California. Our congresswoman was there for 15 consecutive terms, unchallenged every time, virtually unchallenged. And then she decided to retire, and we had 12 candidates the next day. Amazing candidates, incredibly talented, all of them. I was like, this is amazing. That just, to me, feels like this whole system is gummed up. And so, as a resident of a blue state, California, which is unlikely, I mean, I don't know, like, we'd probably be more likely to be hit by an asteroid than California going for Trump.
If we lose California, it's long gone. We lost a long time ago.
That's right. That's right. So my view is like, okay, well, if I'm in a dark blue state, but I would argue if someone's in a dark red state and they're unhappy with the current two kind of leading parties, there is an opportunity to make your voice heard in another way. And that would be by having record showings for third parties in general. And it would not change the outcome of the election, but it would put both parties on a little bit of like oh shoot, we need to kind of be a little more responsive to our customers and be a little bit more, address some of their concerns. Otherwise, we're going to lose our market share. So that's my view. Now, if you live in a purple state, for all that I've said about Biden, you have to go with him because Donald Trump basically tried to stay in power after losing an election, which is like the definition of anti-democratic and anti-American. Like, it is closer to like King George than to a president than George Washington, right? So to me, that's like a no-brainer. Not to mention, like, I think he will bring with him like even more swamp creatures or MJT types, which will not be good for. It'll be great for social media, but it will not be good for the country. So if you're in a purple state, like, no question, just, I hear you. Hold your nose and vote for Biden because the alternative really is unthinkable. But if you are in a dark red or dark blue state, you're in California, you vote for Jill Stein, like, that's a vote for the environment. It's a vote for more aggressive ceasefire moves, and it's a little bit of a signal to the other two parties. All right, Philip, you give your thoughts. What's your advice to people?
I think we agree 100% on, if you're in a purple state, you don't have to love Biden as much as I do. I think he's in such a good job as I do, but vote for Biden.
Yeah.
Like, make a difference instead of just making a point, and let's get Donald Trump nowhere near the White House. 100%. I think you raise a really interesting point about, what we can do to send like signals and symbols in blue and red states that maybe will not decide the election. I guess where I would push back a little bit is on the type of signal you're sending,
Mm-hmm.
because in my view, if we imagine two scenarios, one where Biden wins the Electoral College, but let's say Trump wins the popular vote, because a lot of voters who are in blue states, said, I don't want to vote for
Mm-hmm.
Biden. So Trump's
Mm-hmm.
now the first Republican in maybe, what is it, 4 or 5 elections to win the popular votes. But he loses. He loses the Electoral College. I think the fact that it's that close gives Trump, one, an opening to make a more powerful argument the election was stolen. And two, I think it makes it harder for other Republicans to say we need to go in a different direction than Trump. And it basically makes the argument to them that, well, Trump tried a coup and he even won the popular vote after he, did a coup. Maybe this isn't actually that bad of an electoral decision to just not concede elections. And so I understand people have genuine disagreements and frustrations with Joe Biden, but I would say the best signal we can possibly send this election is everyone voting for Biden to send a clear message that if you do a coup, I don't care about, anything else basically. If you don't concede an election in America, we are going to landslide you and you will never get close to the White House. I think the better message there is a pro-democracy message that is about saying no to dictators and no to coups. I think that would be a very well-received message. I think that the, voting for Jill Stein here, RFK there, and in red states and blue states, I think that will kind of muddle a pro-democracy message. And I think the end result will just be people taking away, well, I guess democracy wasn't that big a motivator in a lot of these states. And I guess Trump got very close to winning. So maybe coups aren't that, big a deal for voters. So I respect totally where you're coming from.
Mm.
And I think we agree on the core most important thing, which is you're in a swing state, vote for Biden. But I would say I think the signal you could send would be more a pro-democracy signal is better served by voting for Biden and giving him the biggest popular vote margin we can possibly get.
All right. I hear you. I think I hear what you're saying, which is if a bunch of blue state people, let's say a giant state like California, if we go for Stein or RFK, and then it basically means that Trump got more popular votes than Biden did, that it will somehow be misinterpreted as some approval of what Trump did. I mean, I would argue those people didn't vote for Trump. They voted for
That's
even
true,
more
but for those
anti-Trump people.
people, it could be interpreted as it wasn't important enough to oppose Trump to vote for Biden. So it
It could
wasn't important enough to stop Trump.
it could be interpreted that way. There are some people that are like extreme MAGA who will interpret whatever happens
And
as,
that's true, right?
you
And that's why
know,
it's so dangerous, right?
yeah. But I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah,
I could see that argument being made. Okay, let's hit two quick questions and then we'll wrap.
sounds good.
Okay. With hindsight, how do we feel about the 2020 Democratic primary, considering every candidate's Israel policy would likely have been identical to Biden's? Um, I think that because of Netanyahu's post October 7th strategy, that a lot of people now are reevaluating America's approach to Israel, which is sad. Which is why I think if you care about Israel, like Netanyahu is really screwing things up for Israel in the long run. Like international support for Israel has been pretty harmed because of it. And we made the same mistake as Americans after 9/11. So I don't blame. I can see why there was this like desire to really um, go all in on Gaza like that. But yeah, so my view would be I think Bernie maybe in 2020 had a more nuanced view about Israel, but I think lately I very much am in agreement with Bernie's view that hey, this is becoming a humanitarian crisis, like that we need to put more pressure on Netanyahu than whatever Biden is doing behind the scenes because it's not working sufficiently. So I mean, in many things I've seen, I was never a huge Bernie guy. I did support him when he was running against Hillary at the very end. Um, but I think his positions on Medicare for all, climate, and now like the need for two-state solution, and like I think we may go to he may go down in history as one of the guys that we should have taken a little more seriously. And the whole like maybe it was the whole socialist label and being from Vermont and a little bit kind of disheveled looking. Like he didn't have the best packaging,
You don't like
but
his hair? It looks so good.
there's a little bit of like college professor vibe to him. But so my answer is like I actually think Bernie, I'm very impressed with him. I don't fault some of the candidates in their 2020 position on Israel because the situation was different. And so I don't want to. I don't think it's fair to hold them accountable for what they wouldn't have known what Netanyahu would have done after 10/7 because it was in the future. I mean, Phil, what do you think of the Democratic Party in general in terms of its approach to Israel?
Um, so I think that in general, I think I agree with you that Israel, is an important ally. It's important that Israel exists, and and obviously we agree that Hamas is evil. I think that's what kind of things that the Democratic Party agrees on. I think there is really, I think, understandable and fair debate around what is the best possible way to encourage a two-state solution, and I think broadly Democratic Party is behind a two-state solution. The question is just how we get there. I think there are legitimately a lot of different voices that have different perspectives. Like you have Bernie Sanders, you have also, people like, the more conservative members of the party who are more kind of supportive of what's going on in Gaza. So I just think that it's a tough issue. It's very complicated and how you get to that endpoint that we all want.
Mhm.
And I do think it's good that we have some diversity in the party, people who are maybe more focused on the Palestinians, some people who may be more focused on Israel, and hopefully together they can find a better answer that does get to where we all want to go, which is two states and self-determination for the Palestinian people.
All right, last question, a prediction.
Ooh, that's a good question.
First of all, I know I'm going to come across as being very critical of Biden. Like the whole, we're not going to use the debate commission. And by the way, let's agree that there will be no third party representation. Like it just seems very anti-democratic, anti-free market competition to me. Um, I'm glad they're going to do two instead of what the debate commission wanted. They wanted three. I'm glad they're at least doing two. Now, for the actual June performance, I'm going to say there's a 20% chance that Biden has another one of these State of the Union, like, oh, wow, okay, look at him. So he might actually come out as a winner, in which case, like, wow, if he can even just then have a tie in the second one, you know, he's got a really great shot, I would say, and I would be really relieved. Um, I think there's a 50% chance they both come out looking terrible and talking over each other or bickering, and they just look like two old dudes arguing on a bench, which doesn't change it for either of them. But I do also think there is a 30% chance, or whatever the remainder is, that Biden has a stumble. Like he has a lapse of memory, he has a long pause. Somehow Trump gets under his skin, catches him in some, trap, and that could be really tough for Biden. But my money would be they both look pretty bad, and it doesn't really change the results.
I'm a little more optimistic than you, I guess. But
I'm sure.
that seems about on brand for this conversation too. I guess I would say I'm glad that they're having a debate. I think it's important. I'm predicting that the expectations are so low for Biden, and I'm kind of confused how he got to these low expectations because, as you mentioned, he gave a great State of the Union address. Senators are talking about how he's sharp in meetings, and he beat Trump in those debates back in 2020.
Yeah, he did.
So I would say I think probably what's going to happen is Biden's going to go up there and do a solid job, and Trump's going to do what he usually does, which is spout off a lot of crazy nonsense and look kind of unhinged. And because, there's been all these crazy expectation games. I think Biden's going to come off looking like a good, honest, decent guy, which he is. And Trump's going to come off looking kind of crazy, which he also is. And so I think that's probably what's going to happen. And then we'll see what happens in September. It's a long way off. I mean, I think if Biden does do better than Trump in these debates, who knows if Trump wants to do round two, you know? He's not someone who is, he's perfectly willing to pull out of debates whenever it doesn't suit him. So we'll see. But I'm glad they're doing debates. I'm confident Biden's going to show up. I think there's a good record to talk about for him. And I think he's shown in these critical moments where people like are nervous, he can do this job. He's up to the task and he's sharp and he's got this. And I will say, if you ever want to do another Nerds for Humanity debate for candidates or whatever, I'm down for that. Okay, so I'll come and fight for Biden here, just like Biden's going to fight on that debate stage.
You know, he should make you ambassador to something in the next term, because you're really doing your best, and you make a good case for him, and I respect that, Philip, and I appreciate you coming back on the show, and hopefully we can have you back on maybe after the debate, and we can play back our predictions. And who knows? You were right on State of the Union, so maybe you'll be right on this one. Maybe Biden's still got some gas in the tank. Who knows?
Never bet against Biden. You know, he's always getting stuff done, and yeah. So I got faith.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good stuff, Philip. I'll catch you later, buddy.
Sounds great. Thanks for the convo. Bye.
Bye. All right. I don't agree with Philip on most things, but I like the guy. He's a thoughtful person who wants to serve humanity, and he also has a good grasp of the facts and the policy and the details. So you got to give him credit for that. I'm not going to relitigate our disagreements, but I totally respect the guy. All right, so I've got to jump to another meeting, but before I do, I want to give credit to the people that have kept this little channel going, which are our channel members. And you can just click the join button on YouTube and help support the channel. If you can't become a member, the next best thing is to like, share, and comment so that the YouTube algorithm can give us a little bit of action, because we don't make shorts. I don't dance. So we need all the help we can get, nerds. All right. Who are these channel members? They are at the highest level, Soldier One, who is a senior vice president. Next are our vice presidents, Kristen Slevin and Bike. Kristen Slevin has been a supporter of this channel for 52 months. Jesus. That's old school. Then you've got Hardcore, Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Mr. History, Mona, Vaughn, Yang, Dean, Galessa, Jay Perrin, Dana, Jason, Daniel, Mickey, Yoda, Jackson, and Unkiyu. And then at our entry level, I'm going to scroll through these. They are in the order of support. Thank you to all our verified nerds. And that's only like $1.99 a month, I think. Basically helps, all this stuff helps us pay for the streaming software, the podcast hosting fees. Oh, we got a new member, Sue Kiesler. Let me get the gong, Sue. Hold on. Oh boy, I'm about to fall down. All right, Sue Kiesler has become a new YouTube member. Sue, may you have great prosperity, clarity, and calmness in your life, and may it be informed by lots of clear, crisp, concise data. Ooh. I love it. You hear that? Oh, I'm going to take off echo cancellation, so maybe you get even more. Yeah. All right. Sue says, thanks for all we do. Yes. Well, thanks to everybody. We had 64 people in the live stream, so that's awesome. I've got to jump to another meeting, but goodbye, nerds, and I'll see you next time. Oh, I've got Dean Phillips coming on the show on Sunday, and I have Jill Stein coming on in a few weeks. So still trying to get either RFK or Shanahan on. That would be a big win. And of course, to get the Yang back on after his TED Talk. Oh, I also have someone, Kristen Gale, who talks about democracy reform and zero-based, I think it's like zero-based budgeting, but for legislation. So she's the one that has been, she co-wrote the book, The Business of Politics or something like that, about how it's all kind of, the incentives are all screwed up. And Yang referenced her work in his TED Talk. So we'll have her on the show as well. She'll be back. She's been on before. See you next time, and goodbye, nerds. Bye, nerds.